Dr. Zephyr had performed 14 species-specific amputations in the past cycle, and though the scent of cauterized flesh still lingered in his sensory folds, he took pride in his work. Medicine aboard the Terran Coalition Outpost Theta-7 was a delicate symphony of protocols, interspecies coordination, and rapid response trauma intervention. The humans, though relatively new to the Alliance, were known for their biological unpredictability and chaos. So much chaos. When the medbay's emergency chime blared, Zephyr was already halfway to the trauma wing. His secondary arms snatched instruments from the automated rack, while his third eyelid flicked over his vision screens. The incoming file was marked Critical Trauma Human Upper Limb Destruction Suspected. Subcutaneous swelling, bone misalignment, extreme angulation. Possible necrotic onset, Zephyr muttered grimly, sidestepping a cart that hadn't been there a moment ago. Prep for high-arm disarticulation. The surgical tech, a feathery journali named Philo, chirped in alarm. So soon? Without imaging? Look at that angle. Zephyr flared his dorsal fins, jabbing at the image. That is no joint. That is carnage. The medbay doors whooshed open, revealing a human male seated awkwardly on the gurney, his left arm dangling in a direction that defied biological decency. Purple-blue bruising bloomed from shoulder to elbow. Sweat gleamed on his pale face, his chest rising and falling in controlled gasps. "Don't cut anything off," he said hoarsely. Zephyr blinked all three eyes at once. "Sir, your limb is... It's just dislocated. You appear to be in severe pain," Philo offered gently, lifting a scanner. "Oh yeah," the man grunted. "It sucks real bad." Zephyr turned to the surgical team. "Prepare for..." "Don't!" The human file name. Thomas Grady struggled upright. "Seriously, just give me a second. It's not broken." Philo hesitated with the scanner mid-air. "Sir, you cannot possibly..." Grady turned, placing his good hand on the bulkhead for support. "Happened back on Earth a couple times. Snowboarding accident, football pileup. College was wild." Zephyr made a horrified noise. "Sir, you must allow diagnostic verification. You might suffer neurovascular compromise. That arm may already be beyond." With a deep breath and a grunt, Grady braced his legs, flexed his knees, and with one swift movement, jerked his left arm forward and upward. There was a wet, wrenching pop that echoed through the medbay like a gunshot. Philo shrieked and dropped the scanner. Zephyr staggered backward, nearly toppling a tray of sanitizing flasks. Grady slumped against the wall, panting, his face nearly translucent from the exertion. "Told you," he said through clenched teeth. "Just dislocated." The arm now sat, astonishingly, in a reasonable anatomical position. Swollen, sure, but functional. Philo let out a garbled squeak, then cautiously waved the scanner over the site. No fracture," she whispered. "Soft tissue damage, minor ligament strain, normal perfusion." Zephyr reeled. "You self-reduced a shoulder dislocation? Without analgesia? Or imaging? Or nerve blocks?" Grady slid to the floor, muttering, "Would have done it sooner, but your stretcher moved weird." Just then, the medbay doors hissed again. Another human limped in, his right knee grotesquely bulging at the joint line. "Hey, anybody got ice?" he asked brightly, wincing as he lowered himself into a seated position. "And maybe like a stick to bite on?" Philo, clearly in mental retreat, handed him a metal tongue depressor with trembling feathers. Grady blinked up at him. "Kyle, what happened?" "Hyperextended it during zero-G dodgeball. Pretty sure it popped out sideways." Kyle examined his knee as if checking a flat tire. Zephyr stepped forward, clutching the railing for support. "You cannot possibly intend to..." Kyle jammed the depressor between his teeth, grabbed his ankle, and yanked sharply. A distinct snap crack sounded, followed by an audible exhale of relief. "There we go, much better." Philo fainted. Grady reached for an emergency blanket, slung it over his shoulder, and said, "You okay, Doc? You're looking kinda blue-green." Zephyr could no longer articulate words. Kyle, now icing his knee with a gel pack, glanced at Grady. "You pop yours back in already?" "Yeah," Grady said. "It was easier than last time." Zephyr croaked, "There was a last time?" "Oh, Like 4, Grady said, smiling weakly. You get used to it. Zephyr's secondary arms twitched. Grady tried to stand, faltered, and sank back down. Still gonna need a sling, though, and like a week of not using it. I'm not a maniac. Kyle nodded, raising his hand. Me too. Some rest, elevation, good old Rice protocol. Rice? Zephyr echoed faintly. Rest, ice, compression, elevation, Grady explained as if to a small child. Basic first aid. You have protocols for this? Zephyr managed. Duh, Kyle said around a mouthful of gauze. We're not savages. In the corridor outside, a Gennari logistics officer paused mid-transmission to stare into the trauma bay, which now resembled a battlefield after the fight was over but before anyone had cleaned up. Inside, Philo regained consciousness only to faint again when Kyle tested his range of motion, and something in his leg clicked like a seatbelt buckle. Zephyr sat down hard, surgical mask drooping. Somewhere deep in his thoracic core, he questioned everything he had ever learned about human anatomy. Grady looked at Kyle, winced, and said, Bet we still beat them at dodgeball, though. Kyle grinned. Without question. 2 hours later, the trauma bay no longer resembled an interspecies horror exhibit, though that was mostly due to the fact that Zephyr had moved himself into an adjacent observation chamber and refused to come out. Philo had been assigned a meditative grooming cycle and placed on administrative rest after her third fainting spell. A sanitation drone politely vacuumed up the crushed gauze, discarded gel packs, and the shattered remains of one unfortunate bioscanner that had slipped from her claws mid-swoon. Inside the primary medbay, Grady lay on a recovery cot, arm immobilized in a fabric sling, shoulder elevated with 3 neatly stacked pillows. A mild muscle relaxant ran through a peripheral line, keeping the spasms in check. Kyle, knee wrapped in compression fabric, had parked himself beside the freezer unit, steadily emptying its stockpile of ice packs like it was an all-you-can-freeze buffet. The two looked unbothered, if exhausted. Pain clearly radiated behind their eyes, but neither was complaining. Zephyr, watching from the glass wall of the observation chamber, kept one tendril tightly coiled around his datapad. His other 3 arms trembled, hovering above medical records, trying and failing to comprehend how both humans remained not only alive, but remarkably stable. Deputy Commander Ress, a tall insectoid diplomat assigned to interspecies liaison duty, entered with his usual haughty confidence and took one look at the 2 injured men. I was told there was screaming, an attempted amputation, and a knee realignment carried out using a cafeteria spoon. It was a tongue depressor, Kyle corrected. Wooden, Grady added. Classic medical grade. Ress turned to Zephyr behind the glass. Doctor, is this normal human procedure? Zephyr made a noise that could only be described as a stricken wheeze. I shall take that as a no, Ress muttered. Look, Grady said, struggling into a half-sit. I get how this might look insane to you guys, but on Earth, people fix dislocations all the time. By forcefully reorienting displaced bones with no anesthetic? Ress raised an eyebrow, or rather flexed his upper thoracic ridges, in a way that humans often mistook for scowling. It's not like we enjoy it, Kyle said. It just beats waiting 3 hours to be seen in ER. Ress paused. You voluntarily re-engage misaligned skeletal structures to avoid bureaucracy? Grady and Kyle exchanged a look. Yeah, Grady said. Pretty much. A soft chime interrupted the conversation. The medbay assistant, a squat Balerian named Wick, rolled in with a new vitals scanner and what appeared to be a hand-knit blanket in cheery colors. I brought comfort textiles, Wick announced. Human patients respond positively to tactile assurance. That's real sweet, Kyle said, but maybe just the scanner, thanks. Wick nodded solemnly and draped the blanket over the back of a chair, just in case. Zephyr finally emerged from behind the glass, moving with slow, deliberate steps, as though afraid one of the humans might explode if startled. Your shoulder, Mr. Grady, he said quietly, eyes locked on the screen. The ligament stretching is moderate. You avoided tendon rupture, which is nothing short of miraculous. Grady exhaled. That's good, right? Good would have been not launching your humeral head out of its socket like a champagne cork. To be fair, Kyle said, he didn't mean to land on the anti-grav rig sideways. I had no idea it was still powered, Grady mumbled. Why were you even in the storage bay? Ress asked. Grady looked sheepish. I lost a bet. Had to retrieve the dodgeball. Ress turned slowly to Zephyr, his voice flat. Your medical team nearly amputated a limb because of an interspecies recreational orb. I know, Zephyr said with a sigh. I was there. And the second injury? Same dodgeball game, Kyle replied. Zephyr blinked. The same one? As in, simultaneously? Well, Grady said, I dislocated mine after crashing into a container. Kyle got his twisted dodging my crash. Zephyr stared. You both sustained major joint trauma from a single leisure event? Kyle shrugged. Pretty standard human Friday. I need more ice, Zephyr muttered, turning to the cryo cabinet with a dazed expression. The door opened again, and this time it was Chief Engineer Bella Marks, expression grim and tablet in hand. All right, which of you used the supply lift as a ramp? Grady flinched. It was theoretical ramp use. Theoretical? She echoed. I had a plan. The follow-through lacked physics. Bella narrowed her eyes. I had to override 2 failsafes. The damage triggered an internal lockdown. Kyle raised his hand. Totally worth it. We got the dodgeball. You got joint damage, an emergency amputation prep, and a formal complaint from the sanitation team, she snapped. Apparently they're still recovering from the wet pop sound. That was my shoulder, Grady offered. Helpful, she muttered, spinning on her heel and storming out. Silence returned to the medbay. Zephyr finally gathered his composure. Regardless of the cultural context, you require proper rehabilitation. Your arm must remain immobilized for no less than 4 weeks, followed by structured physical therapy. Grady nodded solemnly. Fair. I'll follow it. Zephyr turned to Kyle. You, Mr. Carver, must also avoid placing weight on your leg for at least 2 weeks. You have minor capsular damage. I will assign assistive braces and elevation requirements. Kyle mock saluted. No dodgeball for 2 weeks. Understood. Wick entered again, this time holding a tray with 2 drinks. I brought hydration fluids. One contains electrolytes, the other is peach-flavored. Kyle sniffed one. Peach. Classic. You've done your research. Human resilience protocols now being integrated into medical logs, Wick said proudly. Zephyr turned to Ress. May I suggest updating the species hazard classification for humans? Ress tapped thoughtfully on his datapad. You're requesting a downgrade from Class 4 containment risk? No, Zephyr said. I'm requesting an upgrade. These 2 caused emergency trauma events with no invasive action taken. They reduced their own injuries. Grady raised his good hand. To be fair, we're not all like this. Indeed, Ress muttered. Some of you are worse. The rest of the shift passed quietly by Theta 7 standards. Grady dozed with an ice pack balanced precariously on his shoulder. Kyle argued playfully with Wick over whether he could get extra pain meds in exchange for dodgeball strategies. Zephyr compiled new entries on human joint resilience, quoting heavily from Earth sports injury data, though he remained unconvinced any of it was medically sane. Outside, a janitor paused beside the medbay door and peered in. Seeing one human with a wrapped shoulder and another icing a knee, both sipping hydrating fluids and discussing limb torque mechanics, he simply nodded and walked away. Another regular day on the outpost. By the 3rd day, word had spread across Outpost Theta 7 like an unsecured plasma line. Human self-repair protocols, or as the crew unofficially dubbed them, meat popsicle magic, became a hot topic of discussion in every communal zone, from mess hall to hydroponics bay. Grady, arm still in a sling, was now confined to non-dangerous physical environments, a category hastily invented by station administration. His range of motion had improved slightly, though Zephyr remained sternly adamant that under no circumstances was he to lift, twist, or attempt any dramatic demonstrations of strength. Even wiping down a table had earned him a long lecture about joint re-injury probabilities. Kyle had not fared much better. His knee had responded well to the compression and elevation protocol, but he now wore a hinged brace and moved with the exaggerated caution of someone who had once forgotten gravity existed and suffered for it. The medbay kept both under light supervision. Unfortunately, neither was banned from talking. Why do you think everyone keeps staring at us? Kyle asked while chewing through a protein bar on their third joint medbay visit of the week. Grady didn't look up from his tablet. Because you asked Philo if she wanted to try reducing your other knee for science. That was a joke. She fainted again. All right, not my best moment. Kyle's casual banter echoed off the medbay walls, which had recently been fitted with sound-dampening panels allegedly to reduce stress on the recovering patients, though Zephyr's muttering about vocal hazards suggested another motive. A soft chime announced the arrival of another visitor. Commander Vera Takan of the Vihari diplomatic contingent entered with the elegance of a floating dagger. Tall, skeletal, and perpetually unreadable, her people rarely engaged in casual interactions, but she had taken a peculiar interest in human medical phenomena. Is it true, she began without preamble, that you severed tendons during athletic rituals known as American football? Grady looked up. Sometimes. And willingly? Well, not on purpose, Kyle clarified. But yeah, it happens. Torn ACLs, sprained ankles, concussions. Takan tilted her head. And the reward for such damage is possession of an inflated animal bladder? Grady chuckled. Not anymore. Now it's a polymer composite. She blinked. Your species is a medical paradox. Zephyr, who had been silently recording new data entries, gave a weary sigh. Commander, they've demonstrated consistent patterns of risk-seeking behavior correlated with social bonding. The activity is not merely tolerated, it's encouraged. Takan turned to Grady. How do you survive? We have hospitals, he offered. And stubbornness, Kyle added. Also, ice packs. Lots of ice packs. Enough, Zephyr interrupted, raising a primary arm. I must conduct follow-up imaging to confirm shoulder capsule healing. Mr. Grady, remove the sling, but slowly. Grady complied, careful not to shift too quickly. He sat upright, rolling his shoulder gently, as Zephyr passed a scanning beam across the joint. Ligaments are stabilizing, Zephyr muttered. Scarring minimal. You will begin Phase 1 range of motion rehab today. What does that involve? You will make small, repetitive movements under observation. That sounds exciting, Kyle said, deadpan. I'd prefer that, Zephyr said, to another unprompted realignment maneuver in my trauma wing. Takan studied Grady. And what if the joint fails again? Then I'll wait for the doctor to do it, he said. Lesson learned. Zephyr visibly relaxed, until Kyle added, unless we're in a dodgeball tournament. Then all bets are off. The tension returned instantly. Do not joke about that, Zephyr said through gritted whatever passed for teeth. I've updated the station's emergency trauma database with protocols specifically labeled, if human dislocation occurs, do not allow self-reduction. Immediate restraint and scanning required. Fair, Grady said. Can I still go to the gym, though? No, Zephyr said. You may not. Kyle raised his hand. What about a treadmill on zero resistance? Number. Push-ups on the other arm? No. Could we at least play poker? Zephyr turned away, muttering under his breath. Takan regarded them both. Your species finds amusement in restriction. We make do, Grady said. Your evolutionary history must be chaotic. You don't know the half of it. The door hissed open again. This time, it was Wick, the Balerian assistant cradling a new device. I present the Joint Monitoring Biobinder, he announced. Created to alert medical personnel if human patients attempt unauthorized limb maneuvers. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Is that a tracking bracelet? It pulses when overexertion thresholds are reached. Grady took the device and rotated it between his fingers. So if I reach too far, it buzzes? It also notifies the medical bay, Wick added. That feels excessive, Kyle said. We're fine now. You're human, Zephyr said. You are never fine. The scanner beeped again. Zephyr reviewed the data. Grady, you may begin pendulum swings and wall climbs tomorrow. No weight bearing. No stretching past 30 degrees. Grady nodded. Kyle, your joint line has stabilized. You may begin seated range of motion therapy under supervision. You are not to engage in impact activities, load-bearing actions, or dodging maneuvers. Would a dance-off count? Zephyr did not respond. Takan watched them both for a long moment. Your resilience borders on absurd, yet it demands respect. You harm yourselves more than any species I have encountered, yet repair with almost reckless certainty." Grady gave her a tired smile. "It's not that we're reckless. We just bounce back. After self-inflicted trauma. Yeah, usually after that." She blinked slowly. "Your cultural practices are terrifying." "Want to try dodgeball?" Kyle offered. She left without answering. By the week's end, both men had progressed to early rehab. Grady managed short sets of wall-supported stretches with a tension band, while Kyle practiced bending his knee at precise angles under Wick's careful eye. No major incidents occurred, though one ice pack exploded due to overuse, and Wick filed an official request for a backup freezer. Zephyr updated medical logs with the following: human recovery rates remain within tolerance but require strict external monitoring. Self-assessment unreliable. Overconfidence likely. Pain minimization, a cultural flaw, rather than a neurological trait. In his private notes, he added, "Never allow both to be injured simultaneously again." Still, despite everything, he had to admit they were healing. Slowly, naturally. By Earth standards, even predictably. He was beginning to understand. That, more than anything, scared him most. It took nearly 6 weeks for Grady to fully regain the range of motion in his shoulder. He could finally lift a tray over his head without the dislocated joint screaming protest, though he still moved with the deliberate caution of someone who knew intimately how much worse it could be. Kyle's knee fared slightly better. His physical therapy had progressed to assisted squats and resistance band work, but neither of them had been cleared for any impact activities. Not that it stopped them from asking every third day. "I'm just saying," Kyle said, as he flexed his leg carefully, "if we modified the rules, dodgeball could be played seated." "No," Zephyr said flatly, without looking up from his terminal. "Like, hover chairs, low impact." "Still no." "Floaty dodgeball," Grady chimed in. "No throwing, just gentle nudging." "Do I need to bring out the restraint biobinders again?" "No, sir," Kyle said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Life aboard Outpost Theta-7 had returned to something resembling normal, though the medical staff had quietly quadrupled their human emergency drills and implemented new cross-training modules titled Injury Minimization, Human Edition. Wick had even begun printing safety pamphlets titled "Let Us Help Before You Pop It Back In," complete with cartoon diagrams. A few were pinned to the mess hall bulletin board. One had already been defaced to give the illustrated human a monocle and a top hat. Grady, now rotating his shoulder with near-complete mobility, glanced across the med bay at Zephyr, who was methodically checking scan readouts. "So, am I cleared?" Zephyr's 3 eyes narrowed slightly. "You have achieved structural stabilization, full mobility under observation, and no signs of residual inflammation." Grady waited. "You are cleared," Zephyr said reluctantly. "But you will adhere to a strict maintenance regimen. No high-impact stressors for another month." "I'll take it." Kyle grinned from the adjacent rehab bench. "So what I'm hearing is, we both survived." "Barely," Zephyr muttered. Philo, newly reinstated and still skittish around joint noises, handed Grady a final shoulder tension band and stepped back like she expected it to detonate. "I want to thank you," Grady said to Zephyr. "You took care of us when you didn't have to, even after we sort of derailed your whole med bay. You dislocated 2 joints, destabilized a logistics pod, and nearly prompted an interspecies incident when you described your college football injuries in front of the Gennari youth tour." Grady winced. "Okay, but I also didn't lose the arm." Zephyr blinked slowly. "That much, I admit, is extraordinary." Kyle straightened his knee brace. "Hey, we heal, sometimes stupidly, but we don't give up." Zephyr studied them for a long time, the tension in his shoulders easing, if only slightly. "I still do not understand you," he said. "You don't need to," Grady replied. "You just need to trust that we'll be stubborn enough to crawl out the other side." I wish that comforted me. Later that day, the station command hosted a safety seminar that neither Grady nor Kyle was invited to, though they were discussed heavily. Zephyr gave a 30-slide presentation on the physiological and psychological mechanisms of human joint trauma, followed by an open Q&A session during which one junior technician asked if all humans could reattach their own arms. "No," Zephyr had answered flatly. "That is not a thing." Meanwhile, Grady and Kyle were lounging in the rec lounge, carefully avoiding any temptation to test their new limits. They played cards, made bad jokes, and let their bodies do what they were meant to do: recover. Ress passed by and paused at the doorway. "Are you behaving?" Grady raised his hands. "No hover dodgeball, promise." "Nor reverse joint stunts?" Ress asked, glancing at Kyle's now bare knee. "Not even a bend beyond 90 degrees, Kyle assured him. Ress shook his head and walked on, muttering something about requesting a station-wide ban on Earth sports. 2 days later, Grady received a message on his personal comm. "Patient Grady, final shoulder scan cleared. You are discharged from outpatient care. Further self-injury will result in mandatory therapy with the Kalani Emotional Wellness Team. You will not enjoy that. Signed simply, Zephyr." He smiled, then typed back, "Noted. Thank you, Doc." He added a peach emoji for good measure. Back in the medbay, Zephyr stared at the message for a long moment, sighed deeply, and added another line to his notes. "Human resilience, baffling. Humor under duress, constant. Pain thresholds, unknowable." Later that week, Kyle was also cleared for full activity, though only after solemnly swearing to avoid anything involving wheels, ramps, or aerial maneuvers for 30 days. He broke the promise on day 4, but only because someone asked if he could demonstrate a safe knee pivot on the 0G treadmill. No injuries were reported. Zephyr was not informed. As for the dodgeball, it was shelved. Not banned, but quietly buried under activities requiring risk assessment approval. They both knew it would return. Probably during the next diplomatic tour. Probably with helmets. Maybe with crash mats. Definitely with ice packs. And maybe, just maybe, a medical team standing by just in case one of them forgot, again, that Bones didn't like angles. For now, though, Grady leaned back in the lounge, stretched his shoulders slowly, and let it rest. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to himself. Not to the aliens. He'd survived a dislocation, dodged an amputation, terrified 3 species, and walked away with everything intact. Barely. But that was just another Tuesday for a human in space.